During the meeting, her dress slipped up, and the millionaire's eyes never left her for a second. Before we explore all the details of this incredible story, tell us where you're following us from and the time. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss a thing, and let's embark on this journey together. She never thought a simple gesture could unravel 10 years of perfect control. The fluorescent lights of the 42nd floor hummed their usual corporate symphony as Maya Delaney adjusted her navy blazer for the third time that morning. Her reflection in the elevator's polished steel doors revealed what she always aimed for: professional, composed, invisible in all the right ways. At 28, she had mastered the art of being essential without being noticed, the perfect executive assistant to one of New York's most demanding millionaires. Grant Thorne's corner office overlooked Manhattan's financial district like a throne room of glass and ambition. At 38, he had built Thorne Holdings from a single investment firm into an empire that moved markets with whispered rumors. Cold, calculating, brilliant, and completely immune to the parade of women who tried to catch his attention through batting eyelashes and strategic lunch invitations. Maya had worked beside him for 3 years, watching ambitious associates stumble over themselves trying to impress a man who seemed carved from marble. She took quiet pride in being different. She was there for the work, nothing more. The morning of October 15th started like any other. Maya arrived at 7:30 sharp, her usual black coffee cooling on her desk as she reviewed the quarterly reports that would shape the day's board meeting. The numbers told stories: profit margins dancing upward, international acquisitions yielding unexpected returns, market predictions that would make lesser firms weep with envy. "The Peterson file is on your desk," she called through Grant's open door, not looking up from her screen. "And the Shanghai team confirmed the video conference for 2 p.m. Good." His voice carried that familiar edge of controlled authority. "How do the third quarter projections look?" Maya gathered her tablet and the presentation remote, her heels clicking against the marble floor as she entered his office. The morning sun streamed through floor-to-ceiling windows, casting long shadows across the mahogany conference table, where 8 board members already sat, their expressions ranging from eager to skeptical. "Gentlemen," Grant's voice commanded instant attention, "Maya will walk us through the quarterly analysis." She moved to the front of the room with practiced confidence, her presentation slides already loaded on the wall-mounted screen. The numbers were impressive: a 12% increase in overall returns, successful expansion into emerging markets, strategic partnerships that positioned Thorne Holdings ahead of every major competitor. "As you can see," Maya began, her voice steady and clear, "our diversification strategy has exceeded all projected outcomes." She turned toward the projection screen, reaching up to adjust the digital display that had shifted slightly out of focus. The movement was innocent, necessary, professional, but as she stretched upward, the fitted fabric of her charcoal dress shifted, rising just enough to reveal the elegant curve of her legs, the subtle strength in her posture, the way afternoon light caught the smooth darkness of her skin. Grant had been reviewing notes on his tablet, only half listening to numbers he'd already memorized, but something made him look up, and in that moment, everything changed. It wasn't desire that struck him, it was recognition. For 3 years, Maya Delaney had been a voice, a presence, an incredibly competent shadow that made his empire run smoothly. But now, suddenly, she became real, 3-dimensional, human. She was beautiful, not in the obvious way of the women who threw themselves at wealthy men, but in a way that spoke of intelligence and quiet strength. Her movements held purpose. Her voice carried authority that the board members routinely ignored, and her eyes, when they briefly met his across the room, held depths he'd never bothered to notice. Maya finished adjusting the screen and turned back to face the room, completely unaware that one man's entire world had just shifted on its axis. She continued her presentation with the same professional excellence she brought to everything, discussing market volatility and growth projections, while Grant sat frozen, finally seeing the woman who had always been right there. The meeting concluded with handshakes and satisfied murmurs about exceeded expectations. Board members filed out, discussing lunch plans and golf games, leaving Maya to gather her materials, and Grant to stare at quarterly reports he could no longer focus on. "Will there be anything else, Mr. Thorne?" Maya asked, stacking folders with the same methodical precision she applied to everything. He looked up, and for the first time in 3 years, really looked at her. "Maya," he said, then stopped, unsure what question he was trying to ask. She waited, patient and professional as always, her dark eyes holding just a hint of curiosity. "The presentation was excellent," he managed finally. Thank you. She turned to leave, then paused at the doorway. The Anderson contracts need your signature before 5. I'll leave them on your desk. And then she was gone, leaving Grant alone with the sudden, terrifying realization that the woman he'd never truly seen had just become the only thing he could think about. He'd spent 10 years building walls around his heart, until one innocent moment brought them all crashing down. Have you ever had that moment when you suddenly noticed someone who was always right there beside you, when a single glance changed everything you thought you knew about them? Maya has no idea that Grant's entire world just shifted. But what do you think will happen when a powerful man realizes he's been blind to the woman who's been his strength all along? Tell me in the comments. Do you believe Grant can prove he sees Maya for who she truly is? Or is this just another case of a boss who only notices his assistant when it's too late? Some discoveries change everything, even when nothing has actually changed at all. Maya's alarm buzzed at 5:47 a.m., just like every weekday for the past 3 years. She rolled out of her modest Brooklyn apartment bed, feet touching the cold hardwood floors of the converted warehouse space she'd stretched her budget to afford. Through the single large window, the Manhattan skyline glittered in pre-dawn darkness, a reminder of the world she served but didn't quite belong to. Her morning routine was sacred. Black coffee, no sugar, toast with strawberry jam her grandmother had taught her to make. 20 minutes of news, while she reviewed Grant's schedule on her tablet. Shower, dress in one of her 6 carefully chosen work outfits, and catch the 7:15 subway that would deliver her to Thorn Holdings with 5 minutes to spare. But this morning felt different, not in her routine, that remained unchanged, but in the anticipation that twisted in her chest as the train carried her toward Manhattan. Yesterday's presentation had gone smoothly, the board members satisfied, quarterly reports exceeding expectations. So why did she feel like something had shifted? Grant was already at his desk when she arrived, which was unusual. Typically, he didn't appear until 8:30, armed with coffee from the overpriced cafe 2 blocks away and phone calls that started his day at maximum intensity. Today, he sat behind his mahogany desk in yesterday's shirt, staring at documents that Maya suspected he wasn't actually reading. "Good morning, Mr. Thorne," she said, settling her purse in her desk drawer and powering up her computer. "You're in early today." He looked up, and Maya felt something strange happen. For just a moment, his usual mask of controlled authority slipped. His eyes lingered on her face, not in the dismissive way of a boss checking to see if his assistant was paying attention, but as if he was trying to solve a puzzle he'd never noticed before. "Couldn't sleep," he said finally. "The Peterson acquisition is more complicated than we initially projected." Maya nodded, opening the Peterson file on her screen. She'd already reviewed it twice yesterday, anticipating questions that hadn't come up in the board meeting. "The liability assessments from their Chicago division are concerning. I flagged several discrepancies that might require additional legal review." Grant stared at her. Really stared. "You flagged discrepancies?" "Yesterday morning. I left a summary on your desk with potential solutions." Maya's fingers paused over her keyboard. In 3 years, Grant had never questioned her initiative. She'd been hired to anticipate problems and solve them quietly, efficiently, invisibly. "Is there something wrong with my analysis?" "No." The word came out sharper than he'd intended. Grant cleared his throat, running a hand through hair that already looked disheveled. "Your analysis is always thorough. I should pay closer attention to your insights." Maya felt heat creep up her neck. She wasn't sure if it was embarrassment or something else entirely. "I'll have the revised Peterson projections ready by 10. "Maya," Grant's voice stopped her as she turned toward her computer. "How long have you been catching mistakes that others miss?" The question hung between them like a confession. Maya looked at him carefully, noting the way exhaustion had carved shadows under his eyes, the unusual vulnerability in his posture. This wasn't the Grant Thorne who commanded boardrooms and made million-dollar decisions without blinking. "Since the day I started," she said honestly, "it's my job." "No," Grant said quietly. "Your job is to manage my schedule and take notes in meetings. What you do, that's something else entirely." Before Maya could respond, the elevator chimed, and Davidson Hartley, the head of acquisitions, strode into their floor with his usual Tuesday morning energy. The moment shattered like glass, and Grant's professional mask snapped back into place. "Davidson," Grant called, his voice returning to its familiar authoritative tone. "We need to discuss the Peterson timeline." Maya watched the 2 men disappear into Grant's office, their voices becoming a low murmur behind closed doors. She tried to focus on her work, emails to answer, meetings to schedule, reports to compile, but her mind kept returning to the strange intensity in Grant's eyes. the way he'd looked at her as if seeing her for the first time. Throughout the morning, she caught him watching her. Not obviously, not inappropriately, but with a focused attention that made her hyper-aware of every movement. When she stood to file documents, she felt his gaze follow her. When she answered phone calls, she noticed him listening to the tone of her voice rather than focusing on his own work. During lunch, Maya escaped to the small park across from their building, needing air and space to think. She sat on a bench with a sandwich from the deli downstairs, watching office workers hurry past with their own wrapped lunches and urgent phone calls. Her friend Keisha, a nurse at Mount Sinai, had been texting all morning about dinner plans and weekend movies, normal concerns from a normal life that suddenly felt very far away. Maya stared at her phone, wondering how to explain that her predictable professional world had suddenly become uncertain. When she returned from lunch, Grant was standing by her desk, holding the revised Peterson projections she'd left for his review. "These numbers are remarkable," he said without preamble. "You've identified cost savings that our entire acquisitions team missed." Maya felt that familiar mixture of pride and invisibility. "I just approached it from a different angle." "What angle?" She looked up at him, surprised by the genuine curiosity in his voice. "I thought about what I would want to know if I were buying the company. Not just the profits and assets, but the hidden costs, the employee satisfaction rates, the long-term sustainability of their current model." Grant was quiet for a long moment. "You think like an owner, not an employee." "I think like someone who cares about the outcome." The words hung between them, heavier than Maya had intended. She'd revealed something without meaning to, that her investment in Thorn Holdings went beyond her paycheck, beyond professional duty. Grant set the reports on her desk carefully, his fingers brushing against hers for just a moment. "I want you to present these findings to the board on Thursday." Maya's heart jumped. "Me? Present to the board?" "You discovered the issues. You developed the solutions. They should hear it from you." It was an opportunity she'd never expected, never dared to hope for. But looking at Grant's face, Maya realized this wasn't just about business recognition. Something had changed yesterday, and now he was seeing her, really seeing her, in ways that felt both thrilling and terrifying. But some chances come with prices that haven't been calculated yet. The moment you start being seen is the moment you realize how invisible you've been. Thursday morning arrived with October rain drumming against Maya's apartment window, each drop echoing the nervous rhythm of her heartbeat. In 3 hours, she would stand before the Thorn Holdings Board of Directors, not as Grant's silent assistant taking notes, but as the presenter of findings that could influence a $30 million acquisition. She'd practiced her presentation until the words felt like prayer, rehearsing in front of her bathroom mirror while flat-ironing her hair into professional submission. The navy suit she'd splurged on last year hung pressed and ready, the one she'd bought for occasions that never seemed to come. Her phone buzzed, a text from her younger brother Javon in Detroit. "Heard you're presenting to the big bosses today. Mom's lighting candles at church for you." Maya smiled, despite her nerves. Her family still couldn't quite understand her corporate world, the politics, the hierarchies, the careful dance of being competent without being threatening. But they understood ambition, and they understood that their Maya was finally getting a chance to shine. The subway ride to Manhattan felt longer than usual, every stop stretching out her anxiety. Maya reviewed her notes one final time. Though she could recite every statistic, every projection, every carefully crafted recommendation in her sleep. Grant was waiting by her desk when she arrived, and the sight of him made her stomach flip in a way that had nothing to do with presentation nerves. He looked different today, less controlled, more present. His usual armor of expensive suits and distant authority seemed thinner somehow. "Ready for this morning?" he asked, his voice carrying an undertone she couldn't quite identify. "As ready as I can be." Maya hung her coat on the back of her chair, hyper-aware of his eyes following her movements. "I've prepared backup slides in case they want additional data on the Chicago division." "They'll want additional data. Davidson always does." Grant paused, seeming to weigh his words carefully. "Maya, I want you to know that what you've discovered about Peterson, it's the kind of insight that changes careers." She looked up at him, searching his face for the meaning behind his words. "Mr. Thorne, if this goes well, I hope you know I'm not looking to change careers. I'm looking to grow in the one I have." Something shifted in Grant's expression, surprise perhaps, or recognition. "You want to stay at Thorn Holdings. I want to contribute more than I have been allowed to." The words came out more boldly than Maya had intended, but she didn't take them back. "I've been watching brilliant decisions get made in that boardroom for 3 years, and I've been silent when I had insights that could have improved them." Grant stepped closer to her desk, close enough that Maya caught the subtle scent of his cologne, clean and expensive, and entirely too distracting for a Thursday morning before the most important presentation of her career. "Why have you stayed silent?" The question was quiet, personal in a way that made Maya's chest tighten. "Because I'm the assistant. Because I'm black in a room full of white executives who already doubt my qualifications. Because I learned early that being smart is threatening, but being invisible is safe. Because that's how the system works," she said instead, "until someone in power decides to change it." Grant held her gaze for a long moment. "Consider it changed." The elevator chimed, bringing Davidson Hartley and two other board members whose voices carried the confident authority of men who'd never doubted their right to speak in any room. Maya felt Grant's presence shift beside her, his protective instincts activating in a way that was both reassuring and troubling. "Gentlemen," Grant called out, "Maya has some remarkable insights to share about the Peterson acquisition." Davidson's smile was polite but dismissive. "Of course. I'm sure Maya's observations will be helpful." Maya felt the familiar sting of being patronized, but today it sparked something different. Not the usual quiet acceptance, but a burning determination to prove exactly how helpful her observations could be. The boardroom filled with the usual suspects: Davidson Hartley, Theodore Blackstone from legal, Harrison Wells from international development, and three other executives whose names Maya knew but whose respect she'd never commanded. They settled into their leather chairs with coffee and confident expectation, clearly anticipating a brief supporting presentation before getting to the real business. Maya connected her laptop to the presentation system, her hands steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her veins. Grant took his usual seat at the head of the table, but his attention was focused entirely on her. "Gentlemen," Maya began, her voice clear and strong, "the Peterson acquisition represents a significant opportunity, but our current assessment is missing critical factors that could impact long-term profitability." She clicked to her first slide, a detailed breakdown of Peterson's employee turnover rates, organized by division and correlated with productivity metrics. The numbers told a story that the official Peterson reports had carefully buried. Their Chicago division shows a 43% annual turnover rate, concentrated in middle management positions. This isn't reflected in their financial projections because they're not accounting for the true cost of constant recruitment and training. Davidson leaned forward, his expression shifting from polite attention to genuine interest. "How did you obtain these figures?" "I cross-referenced their public employment postings with industry salary databases and compared them to productivity reports from their last 3 quarterly filings." Maya clicked to the next slide, showing cost projections that painted a very different picture than Peterson's optimistic estimates. "If we acquire Peterson without addressing these systemic issues, we're inheriting a 22% higher operational cost than projected." The room was quiet now, the kind of focused silence that Maya had observed from her note-taking corner, but never commanded herself. She continued through her presentation, revealing hidden maintenance costs, regulatory compliance issues, and market vulnerabilities that Peterson's executives had either overlooked or deliberately obscured. However, Maya clicked to her final recommendation slide, these challenges also represent opportunities. With strategic restructuring and targeted investment, we can address the root causes and potentially exceed original profit projections by 18% within 2 years. When she finished, the boardroom was silent, except for the soft whisper of rain against the windows. Maya gathered her materials, trying to read the expressions around the table, trying to gauge whether she'd just advanced her career or destroyed it. Theodore Blackstone spoke first. "This analysis is more thorough than anything our acquisition team provided." Harrison Wells nodded slowly. "The regulatory compliance issues alone could have cost us millions in fines." Davidson looked uncomfortable, clearly realizing that his team had missed critical details that Thorne Holdings' assistant had discovered. "Maya, how long did this research take you?" 3 days, working after hours." Grant's voice cut through the room with quiet authority. "Maya identified problems that could have cost us tens of millions, and she developed solutions that could generate additional profits. I think it's time we had a serious conversation about restructuring our analysis protocols." But Maya was about to learn that being seen comes with complications she'd never anticipated. Success has a way of changing everything, including the rules you thought you understood. The aftermath of Maya's presentation rippled through Thorne Holdings like a stone dropped in still water. By Friday afternoon, word had spread through the office's invisible network of whispered conversations and knowing glances. Maya Delaney, the quiet assistant, had just schooled the entire acquisitions team. Maya tried to focus on her usual tasks, organizing Grant's calendar, preparing briefs for Monday's meetings, returning calls from clients who still assumed they were speaking to a secretary rather than the woman who'd just identified millions in hidden costs. But the atmosphere had shifted in ways both exhilarating and unsettling. Davidson Hartley hadn't spoken to her since Thursday's meeting. Theodore Blackstone nodded respectfully when they passed in the hallway. Harrison Wells had actually asked her opinion about regulatory compliance in the European markets, a conversation that would have been unthinkable a week ago. But it was Grant's behavior that left Maya feeling most off balance. He'd started including her in strategy discussions that traditionally happened behind closed doors. He asked for her input on deals that had nothing to do with her official responsibilities. And he looked at her, really looked at her, in ways that made Maya's skin warm and her professional composure harder to maintain. "Maya," Grant called from his office doorway at 4:30 Friday afternoon. "Can you come in here for a moment?" She gathered her tablet and pen, the same routine she'd followed hundreds of times before. But when she entered his office, Grant wasn't behind his desk reviewing documents. He was standing by the windows overlooking Manhattan, his posture unusually relaxed. "Close the door," he said without turning around. Maya's heart skipped. In 3 years, Grant had never asked her to close his office door. Their interactions were always professional, transparent, observable by anyone who might walk past. Closing the door felt like crossing a line into territory she wasn't sure she was ready to navigate, but she closed it anyway. "The Peterson acquisition is moving forward," Grant said, still facing the windows. "The board voted unanimously to proceed with your recommendations." "That's wonderful news." Maya remained standing near the door, tablet clutched against her chest like a shield. "It's more than wonderful, it's career-defining." Grant turned to face her, and Maya was startled by the intensity in his eyes. "Maya, what you accomplished yesterday, that wasn't just good analysis. That was the kind of insight that separates competent employees from indispensable ones." Maya felt heat creep up her neck. "I'm glad I could contribute meaningfully to the company's success." "Stop." Grant's voice was sharper than she'd expected. "Stop talking like you're reading from a corporate handbook." The rebuke stung, partly because it was accurate. Maya had spent 3 years perfecting the art of professional neutrality, of saying the right things in the right tone, without revealing anything personal or vulnerable. "I don't understand what you want from me, Mr. Thorne." Grant moved closer, close enough that Maya caught the subtle scent of his cologne, close enough to see the way exhaustion and something else, anticipation, anxiety, had carved lines around his eyes. "I want honesty, real honesty." His voice dropped to just above a whisper. "Maya, do you enjoy your work here?" The question caught her off guard. "Of course I do. That's not what I asked. Do you enjoy it? Or do you endure it?" Maya stared at him, recognizing a trap, but not understanding its nature. "Why does that matter?" "Because I'm about to offer you an opportunity that will change everything about your role here, and I need to know if you're ready for that kind of change." Grant moved to his desk, retrieving a folder that looked official and important. "The Peterson acquisition requires on-site analysis in Chicago. 2 weeks, maybe 3, working directly with their executive team to implement the structural changes you recommended." Maya's pulse quickened. It was the kind of assignment she'd dreamed about. Real responsibility, strategic work, a chance to prove her value beyond scheduling and note-taking. "You want me to go to Chicago?" "I want you to lead the Chicago transition." Grant's words hung in the air between them, heavy with implications Maya wasn't sure she was ready to examine. "As my direct representative, with full authority to make implementation decisions." It was everything she'd worked toward, everything she'd hoped for but never dared to expect. Maya should have felt pure elation, should have accepted immediately with professional gratitude and excitement. Instead, she felt a flutter of unease. "Mr. Thorne, why are you offering this to me?" Grant's expression shifted, becoming almost vulnerable. "Because you're the best person for the job." "Am I? Or am I the person you've suddenly started noticing?" The words escaped before Maya could stop them, carrying 3 years of careful professionalism and suddenly sharp awareness of how much had changed since last Tuesday's presentation. Grant stared at her, and Maya watched something complicated cross his face. Surprise, recognition, perhaps even respect. "Both," he said finally, his honesty as unexpected as it was disarming. Maya felt the ground shift beneath her feet. This wasn't just about professional advancement anymore. Grant Thorne, the man who'd barely acknowledged her existence for 3 years, was offering her career-defining opportunities while looking at her like she was the most fascinating puzzle he'd ever encountered. "Maya!" Grant's voice was gentler than she'd ever heard it. "I know this is sudden. I know it complicates things, but you deserve this opportunity, and I believe you'll excel at it." She wanted to say yes. Every ambitious part of her, every dream she'd deferred and goal she'd quietly harbored, demanded that she accept immediately. But something held her back, an instinct for self-preservation that had served her well in a world where being noticed could be as dangerous as being ignored. "I need to think about it," she said carefully. Grant nodded, though Maya caught a flicker of disappointment in his eyes. "Of course, take the weekend. But Maya," she paused at the door, hand on the handle. "Don't let fear make this decision for you." Maya left his office with her mind spinning and her heart racing, carrying the weight of an opportunity that felt both like everything she'd wanted and everything she should be afraid of. As she gathered her things and prepared to leave for the weekend, one thought echoed through her mind with uncomfortable clarity. Grant Thorne was seeing her now, really seeing her. But being seen by a man with that much power came with complications she'd never had to navigate before, and Monday morning she would have to decide if those complications were worth the risk. Sometimes the most important conversations happen with yourself. Maya's Saturday morning began with rain against her apartment windows and a phone call that changed everything she thought she understood about her situation. "Girl, you sound stressed," Keisha observed, her nurse's intuition cutting through Maya's careful attempts at casual conversation. They'd been friends since college, bonded by late-night study sessions and shared dreams of building careers that mattered. "What's really going on at that fancy job of yours?" Maya curled deeper into her couch, cradling her coffee mug like a lifeline. Through her window, Brooklyn stretched out grey and contemplative, matching her mood perfectly. "Remember how I told you about that presentation I gave? The one where you showed up all those executives? Maya, I'm still proud of you for that. Well, now my boss wants to send me to Chicago, lead a major project. It's everything I've worked for." Maya paused, trying to find words for the complication she couldn't quite name. "But I think he's interested in me, personally." Keisha's silence stretched long enough for Maya to wonder if the call had dropped. Then, "Maya Delaney, are you telling me that fine-ass millionaire boss of yours is finally noticing you exist? It's not that simple. Honey, it never is." Keisha's voice carried the wisdom of someone who'd navigated her own share of complicated workplace dynamics. "But let me ask you something. Are you interested in him?" The question hung in Maya's apartment like morning fog, obscuring everything she thought she knew about her own feelings. Was she interested in Grant Thorne? The question felt simultaneously obvious and impossible to answer. "I don't know," Maya admitted. "For 3 years he was just my boss, brilliant, demanding, completely focused on work. I respected him professionally, but I never thought of him as a man, as someone who would ever see me as more than his assistant." Maya spent the rest of Saturday walking through Prospect Park, trying to sort through emotions she'd never allowed herself to acknowledge. Grant Thorne was undeniably attractive, tall, well-dressed, commanding in ways that made boardrooms fall silent when he spoke. But Maya had trained herself not to notice those things, not to waste emotional energy on impossible fantasies. Now, suddenly, the impossible felt dangerously possible. Sunday brought clarity in the form of an unexpected visitor. Maya's brother Javon stood at her door with takeout Chinese food, and the kind of direct questioning that only family could get away with. "Mom says you're nervous about some big opportunity at work," he said, unpacking containers of lo mein and sweet and sour chicken on her small dining table. "Want to tell your little brother what's really bothering you?" At 25, Javon was hardly little anymore. He'd grown into the kind of man who fixed cars during the day and took night classes toward his engineering degree, someone who understood both ambition and the complications that came with it. Maya found herself telling him everything: the presentation, Grant's changed behavior, the Chicago opportunity, her growing awareness that professional advancement and personal attraction were becoming dangerously intertwined. "So let me get this straight," Javon said, twirling noodles around his chopsticks with impressive dexterity. "This man who's been treating you like furniture for 3 years suddenly realizes you're brilliant and beautiful, and now he wants to give you everything you've worked for? When you put it like that, it sounds like you should be careful as hell." Javon's expression grew serious. "Maya, I'm not saying don't take the opportunity. You deserve it. But don't confuse professional recognition with personal interest. And don't let anyone, not even a millionaire, make you feel like you owe them something for finally seeing what was always there." His words echoed in Maya's mind as she prepared for Monday morning. She chose her outfit carefully, the charcoal grey suit that made her feel powerful, the silk blouse that suggested competence without compromise. If she was going to have a conversation that could change her career, she wanted to feel like herself, strong, professional, uncompromising. The subway ride to Manhattan felt different than usual, charged with possibility and decision. Maya reviewed her mental list of questions, concerns, and conditions. If she was going to Chicago, it would be on her terms, with clear professional boundaries and explicit understanding of expectations. Grant was already at his desk when she arrived, but today he looked up immediately when she entered their shared space. "Good morning, Maya. Did you have a good weekend?" "Productive," she replied, hanging her coat with deliberate calm. "I've thought about your offer." Something shifted in Grant's posture, anticipation mixed with what looked like anxiety. "And?" Maya moved to stand in front of his desk, maintaining eye contact in a way that felt both professional and personal. "I'll go to Chicago, but I have conditions." Grant leaned back in his chair, studying her face with the focused attention she was still getting used to. "I'm listening. First, I want this assignment in writing. Clear expectations, defined authority, specific deliverables, not a handshake agreement that can be reinterpreted later. Done. Second, when I return from Chicago, I want a formal review of my role here. Not just a pat on the head and back to answering phones. A real conversation about advancement opportunities." Grant nodded slowly. "What else?" Maya took a breath, preparing to voice the concern that had kept her awake most of Sunday night. "Mr. Thorne, I need to know that this opportunity is based on my professional capabilities, not on anything else." The silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken implications. Maya watched Grant's expression change, becoming more serious, more vulnerable than she'd ever seen him. "Maya," he said finally, his voice quieter than usual, "you're right to ask that question, and you deserve a completely honest answer." He stood up, moving around his desk to face her directly, close enough that Maya had to tilt her head up to maintain eye contact. "3 years ago I hired you because you were the most qualified candidate. Your work has been exceptional every single day since then. The Chicago assignment is yours because you identified problems that could have cost us millions and developed solutions that could generate unprecedented profits." Maya felt some of the tension in her shoulders ease, but Grant wasn't finished. "But I'd be lying if I said that was the only reason I want you in Chicago." His honesty was brutal and beautiful. "Maya, somewhere between Tuesday's presentation and this moment, I realize that I've been blind to someone extraordinary. And yes, that affects how I see you, how I think about working with you, how I imagine—" He stopped himself, running a hand through his hair in a gesture that made him look younger, less controlled. "What I'm trying to say is, you've earned this opportunity completely on your own merit, but I can't pretend that my feelings aren't complicated, and I won't insult your intelligence by pretending they don't exist." Maya realized that the most dangerous proposals are often the most honest ones. Some journeys change more than your location. The flight to Chicago departed LaGuardia at 6:45 a.m. on a Tuesday that felt like the beginning of everything. Maya settled into her business class seat, another first, courtesy of Thorne Holdings' commitment to treating her like the executive she was becoming, rather than the assistant she'd been, and tried to focus on the Peterson files spread across her tray table. Grant sat 2 rows ahead, ostensibly giving her space to work, but Maya caught him glancing back more often than professional courtesy required. Their conversation from Monday had created a new awareness between them, electric and complicated and impossible to ignore. The honesty had been both liberating and terrifying. Grant's admission that his feelings were complicated had validated every instinct Maya had developed over the past 2 weeks. But it had also made their professional relationship infinitely more complex. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're beginning our descent into Chicago," the pilot announced, and Maya felt her stomach flutter with anticipation that had nothing to do with altitude changes. The Peterson Industries headquarters occupied a gleaming tower in Chicago's financial district, all glass and steel ambition reaching toward an October sky that promised early winter. Maya stood on the sidewalk outside the building, her breath visible in the crisp air, and felt the weight of opportunity settling around her shoulders like a perfectly tailored coat. "Impressive, isn't it?" Grant appeared beside her, his own breath forming small clouds as he spoke. "Peterson built this place when he was about my age, 38 years old, and convinced he could conquer the world." Maya looked up at the building, then at Grant. "Did he? He conquered Chicago. Sometimes that's enough." Grant's voice carried an undertone Maya couldn't quite interpret. "Ready to go make our own conquests?" The Peterson executive team was waiting in a conference room on the 41st floor, 5 men and 2 women who looked like they'd rather be anywhere else than listening to representatives from the company that had just acquired them. Maya recognized the expressions, polite hostility masked as professional courtesy. Mr. Thorne, Ms. Delaney, Peterson's CEO, Richard Gallagher, stood to greet them with a handshake that lasted exactly the appropriate amount of time and conveyed exactly the appropriate amount of enthusiasm. Welcome to Chicago. Maya had prepared for this moment, but actually standing in front of executives who knew she'd identified their company's hidden weaknesses felt like stepping onto a stage where everyone knew the script except her. Thank you for hosting us, Grant replied smoothly. Maya will be leading the transition analysis. She has some innovative approaches to the challenges we've identified. The shift in the room was subtle, but unmistakable. Eyes that had been focused on Grant turned to Maya with varying degrees of curiosity, skepticism, and calculation. She felt the familiar weight of being evaluated, of having to prove herself before she'd even spoken. Ms. Delaney, said Helena Morrison, Peterson's head of operations, we've reviewed your preliminary assessment. Some of your conclusions were surprising. The word hung in the air like a challenge. Maya opened her tablet, projecting her prepared slides onto the conference room screen, with movements that felt steadier than her pulse. Surprising often means overlooked, Maya replied, clicking to her first slide. Let's start with your Chicago division's turnover rates. For the next hour, Maya walked them through her analysis, with the same thorough precision she'd used in New York, but this time, the stakes felt higher. These weren't board members evaluating an acquisition. These were employees whose jobs, whose futures, hung in the balance of her recommendations. She watched faces change as she presented her findings, initial resistance giving way to recognition, then to reluctant respect. When she outlined her proposed solutions, targeted retention programs, management restructuring, efficiency improvements that could save jobs rather than eliminate them, the hostility in the room began to transform into something that looked almost like hope. These projections, Richard Gallagher said when Maya finished, they suggest we could actually increase employment while improving profitability. That's the goal, Maya confirmed. Sustainable growth that benefits everyone. After the meeting, as the Peterson executives filed out with handshakes that felt warmer than the initial greetings, Grant lingered by the conference room windows overlooking the Chicago River. That was masterful, he said, without turning around. You didn't just present a business case. You presented a vision that made them want to be part of the solution. Maya gathered her materials, trying to process the rush of accomplishment and adrenaline. They're good people facing uncertain circumstances. They deserved honesty about both the problems and the possibilities. Grant turned to face her, and Maya was struck again by how different he looked when his professional mask slipped. Younger, more real, more human. Maya, can I ask you something personal? The question made her stomach flip. That depends on how personal. Why did you accept this assignment? Really? Maya considered deflecting with a safe, professional answer. Instead, she found herself being as honest as he'd been in New York. Because I'm tired of being invisible. Because I want to prove that I can do more than manage calendars and take notes. And because... She paused, recognizing the edge of a cliff she wasn't sure she was ready to jump from. Because? Because I wanted to see if the way you've been looking at me lately is real, or if it's just the novelty of finally noticing someone who was always there. Grant crossed the conference room toward her, moving with the controlled intensity she'd observed in boardrooms, but never directed at her personally. When he stopped in front of her, close enough that Maya could see the flecks of gold in his brown eyes, she felt her professional composure waver. Maya, he said, his voice low and serious, there's nothing novel about the way I see you now. What's novel is finally admitting it to myself. Before Maya could respond, her phone buzzed with a text from Helena Morrison. Dinner tonight? Team wants to continue the conversation over real Chicago deep dish. 7 p.m. at Geno's East. The interruption broke the spell, and Maya stepped back, creating physical distance that felt both necessary and disappointing. The Peterson team wants to have dinner, she said, showing Grant the text. Continuing the conversation. Grant nodded, though Maya caught a flicker of something, disappointment, relief in his expression. Good. Building personal relationships with the transition team will make implementation smoother. Will you be joining us? I think this is your show, Maya. They're responding to you, trusting you. I don't want to complicate that dynamic. As they left the Peterson building and stepped into Chicago's early evening bustle, Maya realized that Grant was giving her something precious. Space to succeed on her own terms. Recognition as a leader rather than his representative. But walking through the city toward her hotel, she also realized that the space between them felt charged with possibilities that had nothing to do with business and everything to do with the way he'd looked at her in that conference room. Some distances are meant to be crossed, but timing is everything. The most dangerous conversations happen when you think you're talking about work. Maya's third day in Chicago began with an unexpected complication. Room service she hadn't ordered, and a note written in Grant's precise handwriting. Thought you might need fuel for another day of conquering Chicago. The coffee here is terrible, but the pastries are excellent. G. She stared at the card, torn between appreciation and wariness. The gesture was thoughtful, personal in a way that made her chest warm, and her professional instincts sound alarm bells. Grant Thorne didn't send breakfast to employees, but then again, Maya was beginning to understand that she was no longer just an employee. Her phone buzzed. A text from Helena Morrison. Emergency meeting at 8 a.m. We found something in the audit you need to see. Maya's stomach dropped. In business, emergency meetings rarely brought good news, and something in the audit usually meant problems that could derail entire projects. She arrived at Peterson Industries to find Helena pacing in the conference room, surrounded by financial documents that looked like they'd been spread across the table by someone searching desperately for answers. Maya, thank God you're here. Helena's usual composed demeanor had cracked, revealing genuine anxiety underneath. We found discrepancies in the quarterly reports. Big ones. Maya set down her coffee and tablet, focusing entirely on the papers Helena handed her. Numbers that should have aligned didn't. Expenses that should have been categorized differently. Revenue projections that seemed optimistic to the point of fiction. How big are we talking? Maya asked, already running calculations in her head. 3.7 million in unaccounted expenses over the last 18 months. Helena's voice was tight with stress. Maya, if Thorne Holdings discovers this during the final audit, they could pull out of the acquisition entirely. We're talking about 1,500 jobs. Maya studied the documents, her mind racing through possibilities and solutions. The discrepancies weren't necessarily fraudulent. They looked more like accounting errors compounded over time, the kind of mistakes that happened when systems grew faster than oversight. Helena, who else knows about this? Just me and my senior accountant, Marcus Webb. We found it yesterday evening after you left for dinner. Helena sat down heavily in her chair. Maya, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest. Maya looked up from the papers, noting the shift in Helena's tone. Are you here as Thorne Holdings representative, or are you here to help Peterson survive this transition? The question cut to the heart of the conflict Maya had been navigating since accepting this assignment. Professionally, she represented Grant and Thorne Holdings' interests, but personally, she'd spent 3 days working with Peterson employees who trusted her, who saw her as someone fighting for their futures rather than just maximizing profit margins. Both, Maya said finally. Helena, I believe those interests can align, but I need complete transparency from you. For the next 2 hours, Maya and Helena worked through the discrepancies, tracing the source of each error, building a comprehensive picture of what had gone wrong and how to fix it. The problems were significant but not insurmountable, if handled correctly. At 10:30, Maya's phone rang. Grant. How are things progressing? His voice carried the usual professional tone, but Maya detected underlying concern. We need to talk. Can you come to Peterson this morning? Is there a problem? Maya looked across the conference room at Helena, who was watching her with an expression that mixed hope and fear in equal measure. There's a situation that requires your immediate attention. Grant arrived within an hour, his expression unreadable, but his presence commanding as always. Maya had arranged for the meeting to take place in Peterson's smaller conference room, hoping the intimate setting would encourage collaboration rather than confrontation. Helena found accounting discrepancies, Maya began without preamble, significant ones. But before you review the numbers, I want you to understand the context. She walked Grant through everything she and Helena had discovered, presenting the problems honestly, but framing them as opportunities for Peterson to demonstrate the kind of transparency and commitment to improvement that would make the acquisition stronger. Grant listened without interruption, his expression growing more serious as Maya outlined the scope of the discrepancies. When she finished, the room was silent except for the soft hum of Chicago traffic 41 floors below. 3.7 million, Grant said finally. Yes. Over 18 months. Yes. Grant looked at Helena, his expression unreadable. Miss Morrison, why are you bringing this to us instead of trying to bury it? Helena straightened in her chair, meeting Grant's gaze directly. Because Maya convinced me that sustainable partnerships are built on honesty. not on hoping problems stay hidden. Grant's eyes shifted to Maya, and she felt the weight of his attention like a physical presence. "And what's your recommendation, Maya?" This was the moment Maya had been preparing for since Helena first showed her the discrepancies. Her answer would affect not just the acquisition, but the jobs and futures of everyone at Peterson Industries. "We restructure the payment schedule to account for the discrepancies, implement new oversight systems to prevent future errors, and move forward with the acquisition. Peterson's underlying business model is sound. These are system problems, not fundamental flaws. That restructuring would cost Thorn Holdings approximately $2 million in additional cash flow adjustments. It would also ensure that we're acquiring a company with completely transparent financials and management teams who prioritize honesty over self-preservation." Maya held Grant's gaze steadily. "That's worth $2 million in long-term value." Grant was quiet for a long moment, studying Maya's face with an intensity that made her hyper-aware of Helena watching their interaction, of the undercurrents that had nothing to do with business flowing between them. "Helena," Grant said finally, "would you give Maya and me a few minutes to discuss this privately?" Helena nodded and left the conference room, closing the door behind her. Suddenly, Maya was alone with Grant in a way that felt both familiar and entirely new. "Maya," Grant said, moving closer to where she stood by the windows, "what you just did, recommending a solution that costs my company money to protect Peterson's employees, that wasn't a business decision." Maya felt her heart rate accelerate. "Of course it was a business decision. I explained the long-term value. It was a moral decision disguised as a business decision." Grant's voice was quiet, almost admiring. "You could have recommended that we use the discrepancies to renegotiate the entire deal in our favor. Instead, you found a way to protect 1,500 jobs." Maya turned to face him fully, recognizing that they were having a conversation about much more than accounting errors. "Grant, I won't apologize for caring about the human cost of business decisions." "I'm not asking you to apologize." Grant stepped closer, close enough that Maya could see the complexity in his expression. Professional respect, mixed with something much more personal. "I'm telling you that watching you work these past 3 days, Maya, you're extraordinary." The words hung between them like a bridge Maya wasn't sure she was ready to cross. In the reflection of the conference room windows, she could see the Chicago skyline stretching out behind them, a city of possibilities and complications. "Grant," she said carefully, "we should focus on the Peterson situation." "We should," he agreed, but neither of them moved away from the other. "Maya, can I ask you something?" "What?" "When this project is finished, when we're back in New York, what happens then?" Maya realized that some questions change everything just by being asked. Some admissions can't be taken back once they're spoken. Maya stared at Grant's question. "What happens when we're back in New York?" Feeling like she was standing at the edge of a cliff, with the wind pushing her forward and her survival instincts pulling her back. "I don't know," she said honestly, her voice barely above a whisper. Grant's expression softened, vulnerability replacing the controlled authority she'd grown accustomed to. "Maya, I need you to know something. What's happening between us? It isn't about the power dynamic. It isn't about me being your boss or you being my employee. Then what is it about? It's about the woman who spent 3 days fighting for people she barely knows because it was the right thing to do. It's about watching you command a boardroom full of skeptical executives and seeing them leave believing in possibilities they'd given up on." Grant's voice grew quieter, more personal. "It's about realizing that I've been working beside someone extraordinary and being too blind to see it." Maya felt her carefully constructed professional walls trembling. For 3 years, she'd maintained perfect boundaries, perfect composure, perfect invisibility. Now Grant was asking her to step into the light, to be seen completely, and the prospect was both thrilling and terrifying. "Grant," she began, then stopped. Using his first name felt like crossing a line, making their conversation irreversibly personal. "Say it again," he said softly. "What?" "My name. You've called me Mr. Thorn for 3 years. Say my name." Maya's heart hammered against her ribs. "Grant." Something shifted in his expression, like she'd given him a gift he'd been waiting for without realizing it. "Maya, I know this complicates everything. I know it puts you in an impossible position, but I can't pretend anymore that what I feel is purely professional." Before Maya could respond, her phone buzzed with a text from Helena. "Maya, we need you back. The Peterson board is here early for the afternoon meeting." Reality crashed back into the conference room like cold water. Maya stepped back from Grant, the spell broken by the reminder of where they were, what they were supposed to be doing. And how many people were counting on them to handle the Peterson situation professionally? We should go, Maya said, gathering her tablet and papers with hands that weren't quite steady. The board meeting. Maya, Grant's voice stopped her at the door. This conversation isn't finished. She looked back at him, seeing the man she'd worked beside for 3 years, and the man who'd just admitted to feelings that changed everything between them. I know. The Peterson board meeting was a masterclass in corporate diplomacy. Maya presented the accounting discrepancies and proposed solutions with the same professional excellence she'd brought to every presentation. But now she was hyper-aware of Grant's presence, of the way his attention focused on her, of the undercurrents flowing between them that no one else in the room could see. Richard Gallagher looked relieved when Maya finished outlining the restructured payment plan. Ms. Delaney, Mr. Thorne, I have to say that your approach to this situation, focusing on solutions rather than blame, is exactly the kind of partnership we'd hoped for. Maya's approach, Grant corrected quietly. This solution is entirely her design. Maya felt heat creep up her neck at the public acknowledgement, at the way Grant was ensuring that she received credit for her work, rather than letting the board assume he'd developed the strategy. After the meeting, as board members filed out with handshakes and expressions of cautious optimism, Helena approached Maya with a smile that looked genuinely grateful. Maya, I don't know how to thank you. What you did today, finding a way to turn our mistake into an opportunity for stronger partnership, that's going to save a lot of jobs. That's what good business should do, Maya replied. Solve problems in ways that benefit everyone. Helena glanced toward Grant, who was reviewing final documents with Richard Gallagher, then back to Maya. Can I ask you something personal? Maya's stomach tightened. What? Is there something going on between you and Mr. Thorne? The directness of the question caught Maya off guard. Why would you ask that? Because I've been in corporate environments for 15 years, and I've never seen a CEO look at an employee the way he looks at you. Helena's expression was kind but serious. Maya, you're brilliant at what you do. But be careful. Workplace relationships with that much power imbalance, they're dangerous territory. Maya felt the weight of Helena's concern, recognizing the wisdom born from experience in a world where women had to navigate professionally and personally charged situations with surgical precision. Helena, I appreciate your concern, but whatever happens between Grant and me, it won't compromise my professional judgment. I believe that, Helena said. I'm just not sure he'll be able to make the same promise. That evening, Maya found herself alone in her hotel room, staring out at the Chicago skyline and replaying every conversation, every look, every moment of tension from the past 4 days. Her phone sat on the desk beside her, Grant's contact information glowing on the screen. He'd texted an hour ago. Dinner? We need to finish our conversation from this afternoon. Maya hadn't responded yet, caught between wanting to see where honesty might lead them and fearing the professional consequences of crossing lines that couldn't be uncrossed. Her phone rang. Keisha. How's Chicago treating you, superstar? Complicated, Maya admitted, settling into the hotel room's single armchair. Keisha, hypothetically, if your boss told you he had feelings for you. Hypothetically, huh? Keisha's laugh carried across the miles between Chicago and New York. Maya, what did that man say to you? Maya found herself telling Keisha everything. Grant's admission, the professional complications, Helena's warning, the impossible position of caring about someone whose feelings could either elevate her career or destroy it. Here's the thing, Maya, Keisha said when she'd finished. You're asking the wrong question. You're asking whether it's smart to get involved with your boss. But the real question is, do you trust him? What do you mean? I mean, do you trust Grant Thorne to see you as an equal partner, not just as his employee who happens to be attractive? Do you trust him to protect your career if things go wrong? Do you trust him to want you for who you are, not just because you're finally visible to him? Maya stared out at the Chicago lights, considering Keisha's questions. Did she trust Grant? The man who'd given her opportunities she'd never expected, who'd publicly credited her work, who'd looked at her like she was the most fascinating person in the world. I think I do, she said finally. Then maybe the question isn't whether you should have dinner with him. Maybe the question is what you're going to say when you do. After ending the call with Keisha, Maya sat in the gathering darkness of her hotel room, knowing that her next decision would change everything. She picked up her phone and typed a response to Grant's text. The hotel restaurant, 8 o'clock. We finished this conversation properly. His response came within minutes. I'll be there. Maya realized that some conversations are worth the risk, even when you can't predict where they'll lead. Some conversations can only happen when you're brave enough to risk everything. Maya arrived at the hotel restaurant 5 minutes early, choosing a corner table that offered privacy without the appearance of intimacy. She'd changed into a simple black dress, professional enough for a business dinner, elegant enough to feel like herself. Her hands trembled slightly as she reviewed the menu, though she knew she wouldn't be able to taste anything she ordered. Grant appeared at exactly 8 o'clock, looking less controlled than she'd ever seen him. His usual perfectly pressed appearance had given way to something more human, sleeves rolled up, tie loosened, hair slightly disheveled, as if he'd been running his hands through it. Maya. He sat across from her, and she noticed the way he said her name had changed over the past week, less formal, more personal, carrying weight that hadn't been there before. Grant. She met his eyes directly, feeling like they were finally having the conversation they'd been circling around for days. The waiter approached, and they ordered almost absently, wine for him, sparkling water for her, entrees they probably wouldn't finish. When they were alone again, the silence stretched between them, like a bridge neither was quite ready to cross. "I've been thinking about what you asked me today," Maya said finally. "About what happens when we go back to New York." Grant leaned forward slightly, his attention focused entirely on her. "And? I think the better question is, what do we want to happen?" Grant was quiet for a moment, studying her face in the soft restaurant lighting. "Maya, what I want and what I think is wise might be two very different things. Tell me what you want first. We can worry about wisdom later." Grant's smile was rueful, almost self-deprecating. "What I want is to take you to dinner again tomorrow night. Not to discuss Peterson Industries or quarterly projections or acquisition strategies. I want to take you somewhere that serves terrible coffee and excellent dessert, and I want to ask you about things that have nothing to do with work." Maya felt her chest tighten. "What kinds of things?" "I want to know why you chose economics over the art history degree you started with. I want to know about the family that raised someone with your integrity. I want to understand how you can look at a room full of skeptical executives and see possibilities instead of obstacles." Maya stared at him, surprised by the specificity of his curiosity. "How do you know about my art history degree?" "Your personnel file mentioned it, but Maya, that's exactly the problem." Grant's expression grew more serious. "I know facts about you from HR paperwork, but I don't know you. For 3 years, I've been working beside someone extraordinary and never bothered to discover who she actually is. And now you want to discover me. Now I realize I should have been discovering you all along." The waiter returned with their wine and water, providing a momentary interruption that gave Maya time to process Grant's words. When they were alone again, she found herself being more honest than she'd planned. "Grant, I need you to understand something. For 3 years I made myself invisible because that felt safer. In corporate environments, being a young black woman means walking a tightrope between being competent enough to be respected and threatening enough to be dismissed." Grant's expression shifted, becoming more attentive, more serious. "I perfected the art of being essential without being noticed because I thought that was the only way to build a sustainable career. But this week in Chicago, being seen, being recognized for my capabilities, having my insights valued," Maya paused, gathering courage for complete honesty. "It's intoxicating and terrifying." "Why terrifying?" "Because being seen by you specifically means everything changes. My career, my position at Thorn Holdings, the way other people perceive me, all of it becomes connected to whatever this is between us." Grant reached across the table, his fingers brushing against hers. The contact was brief but electric, sending awareness shooting up Maya's arm. "Maya, I need you to know that your career, your position, your future at Thorn Holdings, none of that depends on anything personal between us. You've earned every opportunity through your own excellence." "I believe you mean that," Maya said carefully. "But Grant, you can't separate personal feelings from professional dynamics. If this becomes something more than professional respect, it affects everything. How the board sees me, how other employees treat me, how I see myself." Grant withdrew his hand, but his eyes remained fixed on her face. "Then tell me what you need. What would make you feel safe enough to explore what's happening between us?" The question was so direct, so focused on her comfort rather than his desires, that Maya felt some of her defensive walls crumble. "I need to know that this isn't about novelty, that you're not interested in me because I'm suddenly visible, but because of who I actually am." Maya's voice grew stronger as she articulated feelings she'd been afraid to examine. "I need to know that if we try this and it doesn't work, you won't let it affect my professional standing. And I need to know that you see me as an equal partner, not as your employee who happens to be attractive." Grant was quiet for a long moment, processing her words with the same serious attention he brought to complex business decisions. Maya, 3 days ago, I watched you turn a potential crisis into an opportunity for stronger partnership. You protected 1,500 jobs while finding a solution that actually benefited all parties. That's not the work of someone who thinks like an employee. That's the work of someone who thinks like a leader. He paused, his voice becoming more personal. And yesterday, when you challenged my motivations, when you demanded honesty about my feelings, Maya, most people are afraid to push back against me. You pushed back because you expected better. That's not attractive, that's extraordinary. Maya felt her heart rate accelerate, recognizing that they were approaching the moment where words became commitments, where hypothetical attraction became actual choice. So what are you asking me, Grant? I'm asking if you'd be willing to have dinner with me tomorrow night, not as your boss taking his employee out for professional development, as Grant, who's fascinated by Maya, who wants to discover everything he's been too blind to see. Maya looked across the table at this man, who'd been a distant authority figure a week ago, and was now offering her something that felt both precious and dangerous. And after tomorrow night, after we go back to New York and return to our regular lives, then we figure it out together, Grant said simply. Maya, I can't promise this will be simple or uncomplicated, but I can promise that whatever happens between us personally, I will never let it diminish your professional standing. You've earned your place at Thorn Holdings. That doesn't change regardless of what develops between us. Maya studied his face, looking for any sign of insincerity, any hint that his words were shaped by desire rather than genuine respect. Instead, she saw the same focused intensity he brought to every important decision, the same careful consideration that had made him successful in business, now applied to something infinitely more personal. One dinner, she said finally. Tomorrow night, not to discuss work. Grant's smile was slow and genuine, transforming his entire face. One dinner. And Maya, yes, thank you for trusting me enough to try. As Maya walked back to her hotel room that night, she realized that some risks are worth taking, especially when someone sees you clearly enough to make promises they intend to keep. Sometimes, the bravest thing you can do is let someone see who you really are. Maya's second dinner with Grant took place at a small Italian restaurant 3 blocks from their hotel, the kind of place where checkered tablecloths and dim lighting created intimacy without pretension. She'd chosen carefully again, a burgundy dress that made her feel confident without trying too hard, hair loose around her shoulders instead of pulled back in her usual professional style. Grant was already waiting when she arrived, and Maya felt her breath catch at the sight of him. Without his corporate armor of expensive suits and boardroom authority, he looked younger, more approachable, more real. He stood when she approached the table, a gesture that felt both old-fashioned and genuine. You look beautiful, he said simply, pulling out her chair. Thank you. Maya settled into her seat, hyper-aware of how different this felt from every other interaction they'd shared. This place is lovely. How did you find it? I asked the concierge for somewhere that felt like a first date rather than a business meeting. Grant's honesty made Maya's stomach flutter. I wanted tonight to be about us, not about Thorn Holdings or Peterson Industries or any of the professional complications that make this so complex. Maya studied his face, noting the nervousness beneath his usual confidence. Grant, are you as terrified as I am right now? His laugh was genuine, surprised. More terrified, probably. Maya, I haven't been on an actual first date in 3 years, and I've never been on a first date with someone whose opinion matters as much as yours does. Why does my opinion matter so much? Grant was quiet for a moment, considering his words carefully. Because you see me clearly. Not just the successful businessman or the demanding boss, but all of it. You've seen me make mistakes, lose my temper, struggle with difficult decisions. And somehow you're still sitting here. The waiter approached and they ordered pasta for her, risotto for him, a bottle of wine they agreed to share. As they waited for their food, Maya felt some of her professional barriers dissolving in the warmth of candlelight and honest conversation. Tell me about your family, Grant said, echoing his request from the previous evening. I want to understand what shaped someone with your strength. Maya found herself talking about her parents in Detroit, her father, a mechanic who'd built his own shop from nothing, her mother, a teacher who'd raised 3 children while completing her master's degree at night. She talked about her brother Javon's determination to become an engineer, about Sunday dinners that lasted hours and involved everyone arguing about politics while helping with dishes. They sound wonderful, Grant said when she finished. Do they know about your success at Thorn Holdings? They know I work for an investment firm in New York. They don't really understand the corporate world, but they understand that I'm good at what I do. Maya paused, considering. What about your family? Grant's expression shifted, becoming more guarded. My parents are both gone. Dad died when I was 26. Mum, 3 years later. No siblings. I suppose that's part of why I threw myself so completely into building the business. Maya heard the loneliness beneath his matter-of-fact tone. That must have been incredibly difficult. It was. But it also made me focus entirely on success, on building something that would last. Grant met her eyes across the table. Maya, I've spent 12 years creating an empire, but I've never shared it with anyone who understood what it cost to build. Their food arrived, providing a momentary distraction from the intensity of their conversation. Maya found herself actually tasting her dinner, the nervousness of earlier giving way to genuine enjoyment of Grant's company. Can I ask you something personal? Maya said, as they shared a dessert neither of them had planned to order. Everything about tonight is personal. Why me, really? I know you said it wasn't about novelty, but Grant, you could be interested in anyone. Why am I worth complicating your perfectly organized life? Grant set down his fork, giving her question the serious consideration it deserved. Do you remember the Peterson board meeting yesterday, when Richard Gallagher thanked us for focusing on solutions rather than blame? Maya nodded. Most executives would have used those accounting discrepancies as leverage, as a way to renegotiate the deal in our favor. You saw an opportunity to build trust instead of extract advantage. Grant's voice grew more intense. Maya, watching you work this week, I realized that you don't just solve problems, you solve them in ways that honor everyone involved. That's not just professional competence. That's character. Maya felt tears prick at her eyes, surprised by the emotional impact of being truly seen. And personally, Grant continued, his voice becoming softer, you challenge me in ways no one else does. You expect me to be better than my worst impulses. You push back when I'm wrong. You make me want to deserve the respect you show me. Maya reached across the table, covering his hand with hers. The contact felt electric, charged with weeks of growing awareness and careful distance finally bridged. Grant, I need you to know something. If we do this, if we try to build something real between us, I won't be your employee who happens to be your girlfriend. I'll be your partner who happens to work for your company. Grant turned his hand palm up, intertwining their fingers. Maya, I wouldn't want it any other way. The rest of dinner passed in a blur of conversation that ranged from serious to playful, from professional dreams to personal fears. Maya found herself laughing more than she had in months, surprised by Grant's dry humor and unexpected vulnerability. As they walked back to the hotel through Chicago's crisp October evening, Maya felt the weight of decision settling around them. Tomorrow they would return to New York, to the complex reality of navigating a personal relationship within professional constraints. Maya, Grant said as they reached the hotel lobby, I know this is complicated. I know there are no guarantees about how this works out, but I want you to know that whatever happens between us personally, your career at Thorn Holdings belongs to you. You've earned every opportunity through your own excellence. Maya looked up at him, this man who'd been a distant authority figure 2 weeks ago, and was now offering her something precious and fragile. Grant, I'm scared. Of what? Of hoping for something I never thought was possible. Of risking the career I've worked so hard to build, of letting someone see all of me and discovering it's not enough. Grant cupped her face gently, his thumb brushing across her cheek. Maya, you are more than enough. You're extraordinary. And if I'm lucky enough to earn your trust, I promise to spend every day proving that you made the right choice. Standing in the hotel lobby with Chicago's lights glittering beyond the windows, Maya made a decision that felt both terrifying and inevitable. Grant, she said, her voice steady despite her racing heart, I want to try. I want to see where this leads us. Grant's smile was brilliant, transforming his entire face. Are you sure? No, Maya admitted, but I'm sure that I'd regret not finding out what we could be together. And in that moment, Maya realized that some risks are worth taking, especially when someone sees you clearly enough to love not just who you are, but who you're brave enough to become. 6 months later, some transformations happened slowly, then all at once. Maya Delaney stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of her new office on the 43rd floor of Thorn Holdings, watching the morning sun paint Manhattan's skyline in shades of gold and possibility. The nameplate on her door read, Maya Delaney, Director of Strategic Development, a title she'd earned through 6 months of exceptional work, not through any personal relationship with the company's CEO. The Peterson acquisition had exceeded all projected outcomes, generating 18% higher profits than originally estimated. The restructuring Maya had designed had not only saved 1,500 jobs, but created 300 new positions across Peterson's expanded operations. Industry publications had featured her innovative approach to acquisition integration, and 2 rival firms had already attempted to recruit her with offers that would have doubled her salary. Maya had politely declined both offers. Thorn Holdings had become more than her workplace. It had become the platform for work that mattered, for solutions that honored both profit and people. Her phone buzzed with a text from Helena Morrison in Chicago. "Maya, just saw the Forbes article about your promotion. Chicago team is celebrating. You're our hero. When are you visiting again?" Maya smiled, typing back, "Next month for the quarterly review. Save me some deep dish pizza." The relationship with the Peterson team had evolved into genuine friendship, professional respect built on shared success and mutual trust. Maya had learned that some of the most rewarding aspects of business were the human connections forged through solving problems together. "Good morning, Director Delaney." Grant's voice carried warmth and just a hint of the playful intimacy that had developed between them over the past 6 months. He stood in her doorway holding 2 cups of coffee, hers black with a touch of cinnamon, his with cream and too much sugar for someone who claimed to prefer it plain. "Good morning, Mr. Thorne," Maya replied, accepting the coffee with a smile that felt as natural as breathing. They'd maintained scrupulous professionalism during work hours, a boundary that protected both their careers and their relationship. "Ready for the board meeting?" Grant asked, settling into one of the chairs across from her desk. The dynamic had shifted completely. He now came to her office as often as she went to his, their interactions reflecting genuine partnership rather than hierarchy. "Ready to present the Morrison Industries proposal," Maya confirmed. "The numbers are compelling, and I think the board will appreciate the innovative acquisition structure." Grant's expression grew more serious. "Maya, before we head into the meeting, I wanted to discuss something with you." Maya felt a flicker of concern. In 6 months of dating, Grant had never brought personal issues into the office during business hours. "What's wrong?" "Nothing's wrong. Actually, something's very right." Grant's smile was soft, genuine. "Davidson is retiring at the end of the year. The board wants to restructure the acquisitions department, create a new position that combines strategic development with implementation oversight." Maya's pulse quickened. She'd heard rumors about Davidson's retirement, had wondered what organizational changes might follow. What kind of position? Vice President of Strategic Acquisitions, full board authority for deals under 50 million, collaborative approval for larger acquisitions. Essentially, you'd be running the department that handles the kind of work you've been doing with Peterson. Maya stared at Grant, processing the magnitude of what he was suggesting. "Grant, are you offering me Davidson's job? I'm telling you that the board is going to offer you a position that's actually bigger than Davidson's job. Maya, what you've accomplished in 6 months, the Peterson success, the innovative solutions you've developed, the respect you've earned from executives across the industry, you've redefined what strategic development means." Maya felt tears prick at her eyes, overwhelmed by the recognition of how far she'd traveled from the invisible assistant who'd stood in that first board meeting 6 months ago. "So what did you tell them?" "I told them that Maya Delaney has earned every opportunity through exceptional work, and that Thorn Holdings would be lucky to have her leadership in any capacity she chooses to accept." Maya looked across her desk at this man who'd learned to see her completely, who'd kept every promise about protecting her professional independence while building something beautiful with her personally. "Grant, did you influence their decision?" "Maya, I didn't need to. Your work speaks for itself." Grant's voice carried the pride of someone who'd watched a partner achieve dreams she'd barely dared to voice. "The board knows quality when they see it, and you, Maya Delaney, are extraordinary quality." That evening, Maya sat on the couch in her upgraded Brooklyn apartment, still converted warehouse space, but larger now, with windows that offered unobstructed views of the Manhattan skyline. Grant sat beside her, his arm around her shoulders as they shared takeout Chinese food and discussed the day's developments. "Vice President Delaney," Grant said, testing the sound of it. "I like how that sounds." "I haven't accepted yet," Maya reminded him, though they both knew she would. The opportunity was everything she'd worked toward, everything she'd dreamed of during those long nights of taking meeting notes while harboring secret ambitions. "What are you waiting for?" Maya considered the question seriously. "I want to make sure I'm accepting for the right reasons, because I've earned it and because I can excel at it, not because it feels like a fairy tale ending." Grant turned to face her fully, his expression growing more serious. "Maya, 6 months ago you told me you wanted to be seen as an equal partner, not as my employee who happened to be attractive. Do you feel like an equal partner now? Maya thought about the past 6 months, the respect she'd earned from colleagues, the professional recognition that had nothing to do with her relationship with Grant, the way other executives now sought her insights on complex deals. Yes, she said without hesitation, I feel like myself, the version of myself I always wanted to be, but was afraid to pursue. Then you have your answer. Grant's smile was warm, proud, completely lacking in possessiveness or credit-seeking. Maya, you've earned this position through excellence. Accept it because you're exceptional at what you do. Later that night, as Maya prepared for bed, she caught sight of herself in the bathroom mirror. 6 months ago, she'd stood in this same spot, practicing presentations she'd hoped might someday matter. Now she was preparing to accept a vice presidency that would make her one of the youngest executives in Thorn Holdings' history. But more importantly, she was preparing to continue building a life that honored both her professional ambitions and her personal happiness. Her phone buzzed with a text from her mother in Detroit. Javon told me about your big promotion. Your father and I are so proud. When do we get to meet this Grant person who finally recognized what we've always known about our Maya? Maya smiled, typing back, next month, Sunday dinner. He's nervous about meeting you, but I told him you'll love anyone who treats your daughter like she's extraordinary. Her mother's response came quickly. Baby girl, you are extraordinary. We just want to meet the man who's smart enough to see it. Standing at her window, looking out at the city that had become home to both her dreams and their fulfillment, Maya realized that some stories don't have endings. They have transformations. She was no longer the invisible assistant who'd stood in that first board meeting 6 months ago, and Grant was no longer the distant CEO who'd barely noticed her existence. They'd become partners in every sense that mattered, professional collaborators, intellectual equals, and two people who'd learned that love built on mutual respect and genuine admiration could transform not just individual lives, but the very definition of what success could look like. Maya's reflection smiled back at her from the window, and for the first time in her life she felt completely, authentically visible, not because someone else had finally noticed her, but because she'd learned to see herself clearly. And sometimes, that's the most beautiful transformation of all. What did you think of Maya and Grant's journey? Have you ever experienced that moment when someone finally saw the real you, your talents, your worth, your potential, in a way that changed everything? Share in the comments. Do you believe love can truly bloom in professional settings when built on genuine respect and equality? What would you have done in Maya's position? Your participation in this channel is very important. Please leave your opinion in the comments. Thank you so much for watching until the end. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and comment your thoughts. Your participation is very important to us. See you next time.